cap of maintenance, the Sword of State, being taken in their own cars from the Royal Mews, along from Buckingham Palace up to Horse Guards Parade and down to the Palace of Westminster. Why? Well, they will be on display, and they'll be on display for the very simple reason that in years gone by, and certainly going back centuries, they would be seen, they would need to be seen as symbols of the King's power or the Queen's power. So we have the reflection of that today. You'll see that the crown a little later will be put on display in the House of Lords, along with the cap of maintenance and the Sword of State. And then they'll be taken in procession into the House of Lords itself for the Queen's speech, as it traditionally is, but delivered today, as we know, by the Prince of Wales. So let's carry on with our debate in a moment here, but because today's circumstances are different, let's just explore that a little more with Rita and her guest.
Hugh, I'm happy to say I'm joined by Robert Hardman, royal commentator and author of the book Queen of Our Times. Robert, this is the first time in nearly 60 years that the Queen has not attended this important occasion. It's a very significant moment.
Well, it is, Rita. I mean, we often hear that word unprecedented, and we are in unprecedented territory today, because when the Queen didn't come in 1963 and previously in 1959, on both occasions she was expecting Prince Andrew, Prince Edward, respectively. But on that occasion, the speech was read by the Lord Chancellor. That was the tradition. That goes back to Queen Victoria. When she didn't open Parliament, she let the Lord Chancellor read the speech, and the Parliament was opened by what are called Lords Commissioners. And the Prince of Wales in those days just sat there and didn't say anything. Today, it's the Prince of Wales who will read the speech. That's because the Queen has issued new instructions, letters patent they're called, under which she said Parliament will be opened by Prince of Wales and the Duke of Cambridge, and Prince Charles will read the speech. So this is, I mean, the last time an heir to the throne read the speech was in the days of a regency over 200 years ago. So that's why all eyes are on today.
And just to be clear, this is the Queen's decision? Very
much her decision, and this is not in any way any sort of step towards regency. This is her decision to, it's a rather 21st century way of doing it. I mean, today, for example, the red boxes are always there. They'll still be turning up tomorrow. She's due to hold a virtual Privy Council meeting. So she's still very much in charge. She is still running the show, but due to these mobility issues, as the palace call them, she doesn't really feel up to being here today. I mean, in her 10th decade, we've never had a monarch reigning this long before. So I think we have to get used to what you might call the new normal. These are going to be occasions where she delegates, and we have seen transition going on now for a number of years. Prince Charles, it's now the Prince of Wales who lays the wreath at the cenotaph, who represents the Queen at Commonwealth summits, those sort of things, and the Duke of Cambridge helps out at investitures as well. So we are in a process of slow, sensible transition, but don't forget that the rule by which Prince Charles is doing the speech and opening Parliament today, it's a one-off. It's not a permanent arrangement. The letters patent are just for today and today only.
And Prince William will be here too. Just explain that.
He'll be here in his capacity as a Councillor of State. Because the monarch isn't here, you have to have two councillors of state to act on the monarch's behalf. And it's to show that element of responsibility the monarchy stands for. I mean, today is an incredibly important part of the sort of constitutional pageant, if you like. I mean, every bit of the Constitution is sort of represented here today. And one day this will be his duty. And in the same way that Prince Charles has been in attendance for many years while his mother has read the speech and opened Parliament. So it's if you like, it's another stage in this rather long apprenticeship to the throne that will one day be William's.
Fascinating. Very good to hear from you. Thank you very much. Robert Hardman.
And there, with his expertise on what's going on, talking to Rita. We'll be back with Rita in a short while. This is the scene in Parliament Square, where we have a wave of Union flags around the square at the moment, because of course it's the day of the state opening of Parliament. The police escort on its way, and the fleet of cars from the Royal Mews bringing the imperial state crown and the other regalia down to the palace, because without them, without these items of regalia, this state opening literally couldn't take place. because the prime symbols of the sovereign's authority have to be there, along with the sovereign normally, but of course special permission given today for the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Cambridge to be representing the Queen. We have the 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards providing the guard of honour outside the palace, facing St Margaret's, Westminster and Westminster Abbey. They're approaching the western end, inside the sovereign's entrance, where the Crown Jeweller is waiting to take make their way in to the foot of the royal staircase. The 2 maces in place as well, so the party can now move forward. So the crown and the regalia will disappear for just a few minutes. They'll just go into the room on the left-hand side there just to make sure that everything's fine before they re-emerge and bring all the regalia back into the Royal Gallery. We'll see that in just a moment. Now, we were talking about the workload, and Chris was talking to us about the workload. What I'd like to do is just to ask the blunt question and start with Simon, if I may. Yes, there is the package already in place, the 22 billion, to help people with rising cost of energy. But I'm just wondering, why is it then that all we've heard over recent weeks is people saying, including colleagues of yours, by the way, that, you know, it's not enough. And the scale of the crisis is bigger than that. And for the Chancellor to say that we'll need to wait until the autumn to see if anything else can be done is a sign of somebody who's out of touch.
No, I mean, we shouldn't lose sight of several important dynamics in this. The first of which is that 22 billion is an enormously substantial package of measures, and this includes the action we've taken on energy bills, as you say, but also the forthcoming cut to national insurance, which will take effect in July, which means that 70% of people will be paying less in national insurance, even accounting for the new health and social care levy to deal with COVID backlogs. But it's also the action we've taken on universal credit to cut the taper rate so that people can keep more of what they earn, our action on fuel duty, all the things which together do amount to a very substantial offer from the government to try and ease these pressures. Do we recognise, of course, that there is a great deal more which is going to be called for? Of course we do, and the Chancellor keeps these things under close review. What I would say is, obviously, we've got the Queen's speech and we'll have the autumn budget. And throughout this whole year ahead, we have to bear in mind we will be spending 83 billion on debt interest, which is an important factor so as not to lose control of the public finances.
So the crown's been taken into the Royal Gallery, where it'll be put on display, as I mentioned earlier, ready for the procession. The crown, which was made for George VI back in 1937. There's a copy of the crown made for Queen Victoria in the early years of the 19th century. Gold and silver and platinum and thousands of jewels and precious stones, and it weighs a ton. not quite a tonne, but it weighs a metaphorical tonne. That's fair to say, Chris, isn't it?
I think that's about right, yeah.
Which is why, of course, the Queen in recent years has not been wearing it, because it's quite a strain. It's been carried on a cushion in the royal procession. And here we have the two other emblems, as I said, the Sword of State, the Cap of Maintenance. They'll also be put on display, ready for the procession. Jonathan, we were talking there, Simon was mentioning this package of measures. Is it your view, not just because you want to score political points, that it's genuinely, 22 billion is genuinely insufficient?
It's not about the quantum, Simon has done what a lot of government ministers do. They just add up everything here and there and present it as an overall sum of money. The real issue is this: are people getting real help with their energy bills? I think the council tax rebate is a fairly absurd way to do it. We want that windfall tax on the North Sea oil and gas producers. They'd still do very well, by the way, but we would use some of that money for the benefit of businesses and households overall. So a third of British households would get £600 off their energy bill. Everyone else would get at least £200. That's real help. And don't forget, it's on the wider economic points. We're recovering from the pandemic. It's a V-shaped recovery, we hope, and that is predicated, the government have predicated that on consumer spending. So if households are squeezed to the point where they're not going out, buying goods, buying services in the British economy, well, actually the overall recovery from the pandemic is threatened. And where there is, we should always take heed of our borrowing costs. But that is partly the way this government have financed some of those costs of the pandemic, a lot of short-term debt, money created to buy longer-term government debt. So that's their own risk that they've put forward. The bottom line is, unless we get real help to households on the cost of living pressures they're facing, there's a huge problem. And why wait to the budget in October? Do an emergency budget now. The first line of this speech could be, there will be an emergency budget to give the British people real help with the cost of living pressures they face. That's what I'd like to see.
We heard Simon say, didn't we, Kirsten, that 22 billion is a lot of money. We have to keep an eye on levels of debt. You can't just spend and spend and spend. Really, are you saying that you should just spend an unlimited amount of money in order to support people? What's the SNP's line?
Well, actually, I think that Jonathan made a really important point there. We should have an emergency statement from the Chancellor. The pressures upon people, I don't think, can be underestimated. This is an emergency for them, and the action that the UK government's taking is essentially tinkering around the edges for a lot of people. It's not going to make the difference that is necessary. People are having to decide whether they're heating their homes or feeding their family. There are choices that the UK government could make, and they're choosing not to make them. People should not have to suffer the way that they are, and it is time that the UK government stepped up.
Lord Great Chamberlain, Marquis of Cholmondeley, who's the man in charge of this royal part of the Palace of Westminster, has gone to collect the crown and take it into the robing room, ready for the procession when the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall, Duke of Cambridge, arrive in a short while. In the meantime, let's join Rita.
I'm pleased to say that I'm joined by Caroline Lucas from the Green Party and Liz Saville-Roberts from Plaid Cymru, both of whom will be in the chamber to listen to the speech. Caroline, your party did very well in the local elections. Congratulations. You've doubled your councillors. What are you hoping for from today's speech?
Well, today, of course, has seen a new report from the Met Office, which tells us that the climate emergency is accelerating even faster than people feared. So what I want to see is tackling that climate emergency front and centre of this Queen's speech. From what we've heard, it doesn't look likely. What we are told about is an energy security bill. But if that's anything like the energy security strategy, which was launched last month, then there's nothing there to help homeowners. There's nothing there in terms of a proper house-by-house, street-by-street home installation programme, which will get people's fuel bills down. It will tackle the cost of living crisis, create hundreds of thousands of jobs, and tackle the climate emergency as well. So I do fear that once again there's going to be a climate-shaped hole at the heart of the Queen's speech.
You, of course, want to see cleaner energy. What we are expecting from this bill is an emphasis on cleaner fuel, on nuclear, on wind, on hydrogen. Isn't that the way to go?
Well, nuclear is a massive distraction. It is costly and it is slow. Yes, of course, we need to see investment in green energy like wind and solar and so forth. But my worry is that what we're also going to see is more North Sea oil and gas licenses. The International Energy Agency has been absolutely clear that there can be no new oil and gas licences if we're serious about getting climate change under control. And so the fact that the government seems to be completely ignoring that, going ahead with it, is deeply worrying. We hoped there would be a nature bill in this Queen's speech too. That seems to have gone, and I can only wonder what Prince Charles is going to make of it. He, of course, an ardent environmentalist, will be reading out a Queen's speech that has hardly got anything in it on that vital subject.
OK, Caroline, thank you. Liz Saville-Roberts, what are you hoping to hear in this speech?
Well, of course, we come up to the week of local elections when the Tories were effectively routed in Wales. They lost control over their only council and lost scores of councillors.
You didn't do that well yourselves.
We did well in the councils.
His eyes are closed. Yeah, same. His eyes are closed as well. And
his eyes are open, but the man's head is...
Yeah.
The guys know exactly what they were on, so yesterday...
No, just as he can't.
Yeah, it's brilliant, but it was terrible. It's going to be proper rain.
Yeah, you can't see because that man's right in front of him.
Duchess of Cornwall to arrive maybe in 3 or 4 minutes' time, so we'll wait for that. Chief Secretary, just to come back to you, with two of your colleagues here, say parliamentary colleagues, saying, you know, yes, you've put this package together, you don't seem to be injected with a sense of urgency about it. I'm returning to the question about whether people are in touch with it. What's the problem with putting more measures in place now? Well,
I know, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
It's so warm yesterday as well.
Yeah.
Warm and sunny yesterday. I put my sun hat in my bag this morning.
Did you?
Yeah. I thought, oh, it's standing out now, it might be sunny. Obviously, I don't.
Spring English weather.
Growth more evenly across this country. I represent Middlesbrough, one of the more deprived communities in England. There is no way in which I am blind to the pressures that the public face. What I'm acutely conscious of is that if the centre-left had their way, and we heard Plaid Cymru advancing the case for more politicians, which I found pretty extraordinary a few moments ago, then we would be trying to spend our way and borrow our way out of a problem, and that is not the way forward.
Kirsten, we may see the Prince of Wales coming along in a moment, so if we do, we'll show the images. Scottish Power yesterday was saying, oh, we want £1,000 off the bill of many households. We want the government to come up with that. Again, I'm just putting the point to you, that's got to be paid for at some point. Is that a strategy that you would back?
I don't think anybody is doubting that things have to be paid for. That's not really, I don't think, what anybody is arguing against. But what I'm saying, and what many other people are saying, and actually what I took from the comments, which I also heard from Scottish Power, is that the way things are being organised just now is not good enough. People are struggling. That struggle will become greater, and it's really not acceptable that the choices that the UK government is taking is actively making people's lives more difficult. Look at the Scottish government in contrast. Look at the Scottish child payment. Look at the uprating of benefits. There are things that the UK government could do, which it is actively choosing not to do, and the impact of that is felt by those who can least afford it, and that pressure will only increase. So the UK government really should be stepping up and making some kind of emergency provision, and making it now, unless they are, as I fear, completely out of touch with the realities of many lives.
You said, Jonathan, you'd like the first line of the speech to be an emergency statement, an emergency budget. Would a plan, such as the one we heard yesterday from Scottish Power, to knock £1,000 off the bills of millions of households, which involve a considerable sum of money, as you know, would that be something that Labour would put forward?
Well, we want to help with energy bills, but we would do that by raising the money through a windfall tax on the North Sea oil and gas producers, use some of the existing revenue flowing into the Exchequer, because of course these record energy bills mean record VAT receipts for the Exchequer. So we would do that, and we would do a series of measures, including taking VAT off energy bills and expanding Warm Homes discount to give people real help. But just one point, say you were to take VAT off energy bills, that would help households, but that would also ease the inflationary pressures on people. And from a Labour point of view, we don't want to borrow money to grow the economy. We want to grow the economy, because the reason you're facing some of the very difficult decisions you are is the economy hasn't grown anything like it should have done in the last 12 years.
Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall arriving for this state opening of Parliament of 2022. Prince in his uniform of Admiral of the Fleet, making their way up the royal staircase, as the Prince has done on several occasions when accompanying the Queen, but today representing the Queen along with his son, the Duke of Cambridge. Making their way up the stairs, the heralds. And among them, Professor Anne Curry. Now this is a development, a female herald. We've not seen that at Westminster before. Heralds being led by the Garter King of Arms, Peter Vine White. Dominic Raab, the Minister of Justice, and of course the Lord Chancellor, responsible for keeping the Queen's speech safe in the Lord Chancellor's purse, which he's clutching rather firmly there, ready to give the speech to the Prince of Wales to be reading in a short while. As the procession forms up in the Royal Gallery, and they'll wait for the Marquis of Cholmondeley to signal that the procession can get underway. So we'll keep a close eye, obviously, on what's going on, and as soon as the procession starts, we'll be back in the Royal Gallery immediately. Chris, where is this debate on cost of living going to go?
I think it's worth taking half a step back to seeing the discussions we've had in the last 15, 20 minutes in the context of the last couple of years. So along came the COVID pandemic and an unprecedented government intervention in an unprecedented circumstance, meaning that there was a vast amount spent then with obvious consequences as far as debt and debt interest payments are concerned now, but also creating space for a political discussion, as we've seen this morning, where opposition parties can make the point, well, look what you did then, look at the scale and the severity of the situation around the corner, with people privately acknowledging in government that things look pretty bleak across the next 12 months, and the argument, as you're hearing this morning, about a desire to see more done now, with the government trying to weigh that up in the context of a situation where taxing and spending is at unprecedented levels in our lifetimes for any colour of government. So that's the context in which today's discussions are happening.
Let's take a look in the lobby, the central lobby and the members' lobby of the House of Commons. Part of the drama of the day, which is ahead of us. And I love this part of the state opening, and lots of you watching tell us every year that this is a part that you like. Now there's the inspector in the lobby, the central lobby, ready to tell strangers, in other words non-parliamentarians, to take off their hats in readiness for the Speaker's procession, because the Speaker will be processing from his residence, which is at the northern end of the palace, down through the corridors towards the central lobby and then along to the members' lobby of the House of Commons, where there'll be quite a few MPs gathered today. No doubt they'll greet him in a friendly way, and then into the Chamber of the Commons, ready to be summoned to go to listen to the speech in the House of Lords. All waiting patiently in the Royal Gallery for those great doors to open into the robing room, and for the state trumpeters, the husband and wife team, to sound the fanfare and to get the procession underway. The heralds, of course, they're now facing the chamber itself, and they'll be making their way along with the royal party. Party will include senior members of the armed forces, senior officials from the royal household, Prince of Wales, Duchess of Cambridge, Duchess of Cornwall, and the Duke of Cambridge, having had the special permission from the Queen to represent her at this state opening, given the fact that Her Majesty is not able to attend because of what the palace described last night as episodic mobility problems. Queen, of course, has had to cancel quite a few appearances in public in the last few months. But in fairness, as my mother keeps on reminding me, Her Majesty is 96, you know, and these things are to be expected, which I think is a good dose of common sense. It's interesting, Chris, when we talk about the way that this state opening is playing out. There we saw the Prince of Wales, the full royal fanfare arriving for the state opening, and we're seeing him for the first time in a fully formal context, assuming the responsibilities of the monarch.
Yeah, and that's a profound moment, isn't it? And a profound moment in the context of the familiarity of every other element of the ceremony that you've been talking us through, timed to the second, all of the elements of it, slowly evolving over time, as you've pointed out, some of the new elements of precedence this time, with that really striking one at the centre with the Prince of Wales, and that glimpse into the future as well. And you think of it, don't you, from his perspective, the thoughts that he must have had looking towards performing at an event like this, and then in this particular context doing it for the first time, having been on plenty of occasions before, but performing the central role today, really quite something.
And the other thing which, I mean, maybe the guests as well have got a view on this, but looking back, obviously, when we heard the news yesterday, everyone was looking at the history books, because, of course, Queen Victoria wasn't mad keen on this ceremony. She wasn't mad keen on many things, including the birthday parade, which she only attended once, I think, towards the end of her reign. But the Lord Chancellor was the one who stepped in for Queen Victoria to deliver the speech. That was the protocol involved. So the interesting thing yesterday, and certainly from a government point of view, given the formality involved, was this enactment really of the letters patent, so that the Prince and the Duke could step in and not just represent the Queen on a fairly informal basis, but to do so with full formality.
That's right, Hugh, and I think it shows the flexibility of the royal family. But I think our shared mood today is just an appreciation of Her Majesty the Queen in her Jubilee year. She's given so much service to this country, and as you say, it is so strange seeing today without her. But it reminds us all, as you say, that she is 96 years old. She has given a lifetime of service, and I think everyone's thoughts will be with her today, because I suspect she will be missing this very keenly.
I'd have thought so, when you think that today, I think, would have been the 68th state opening. Let's wait for the instruction from the inspector, because I have a sense that it's coming up fairly soon, because the inspector will be told that the Speaker's procession is on its way, and then they will come into view at the far end there. All the expectation. This happens every day that Parliament's in session, the House of Commons in session.
Hats off, strangers!
Sergeant-at-Arms and the Speaker's chaplain in the procession, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, who's known for his cheerful manner and his way of trying to cajole MPs into doing as he wants them to do and to curb their enthusiasm sometimes. And into the members' lobby of the House of Commons. So into the chamber of the House of Commons, which in a short while will be closed very firmly when Black Rod approaches, just to demonstrate the independence of the House of Commons from the monarch. Plenty of smiles and a bit of laughter, and look at the contrast, silence in the Royal Gallery as the yeomen of the guard and the heralds wait to start the procession once the royal party emerges from the robing room. And that sense of expectation, of course, also present in the chamber of the House of Lords. Great creation of Barry and Pugin with that wonderful canopied throne which dominates the chamber. But today, the pair of thrones no longer there. The sovereign's throne has been taken out for today's event, and what is known as the consort's throne, slightly lower in terms of its height, is there for the Prince of Wales. So we're waiting for the state trumpeters. Lord Chancellor Dominic Raab, waiting with the speech. And all the diplomats and all the guests, some of whom have been here before, some of whom are here for the first time, getting a taste of the colour and the pageantry of the state opening of Parliament. There's nothing quite like it. So the state trumpeters, a signal of the fact that we are in a royal section of the palace, and all of the ceremonial that we'll see shortly is there to demonstrate the fact that while the sovereign can go wherever he or she wishes in this part of the palace, to enter the chamber of the Commons is not something that's allowed. It's not something that's welcomed. So when the monarch's representative, Blackrod in this instance, is sent to summon members of Parliament, Blackrod will find that the door of the House of Commons is closed. That's the statement of the independence of the chamber. And then they will come of their own free will to listen to the content of the speech, led by the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. And won't it be interesting in a short while to see the body language between the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and Sir Keir Starmer for Labour, given the events of recent days. So the royal procession, this state opening of 2022, gets underway, led by the Marquis of Cholmondeley and the Duke of Norfolk. There we have the imperial state crown leading the way, a sign of the authority of the day's proceedings. And representing Her Majesty the Queen, we have the Prince of Wales, Duchess of Cornwall, and the Duke of Cambridge, following the crown on its way into the chamber of the House of Lords.
It's Blackrod. Open the door. Blackrod!
Mr. Speaker, the Queen commands this Honourable House to attend her Councillors of State immediately in the House of Peers.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, Her Majesty's Government's priority is to grow and strengthen the economy and help ease the cost of living for families. Her Majesty's Government will level up opportunity in all parts of the country and support more people into work. Her Majesty's Ministers will continue to support the police to make the streets safer and fund the National Health Service to reduce the COVID backlogs. In these challenging times, Her Majesty's Government will play a leading role in defending democracy and freedom across the world, including continuing to support the people of Ukraine. Her Majesty's Government will drive economic growth to improve living standards and fund sustainable investment in public services. This will be underpinned by a responsible approach to the public finances, reducing debt while reforming and cutting taxes. Her Majesty's ministers will support the Bank of England to return inflation to its target. A bill will be brought forward to drive local growth, empowering local leaders to regenerate their areas and ensuring everyone can share in the United Kingdom's success. The planning system will be reformed to give residents more involvement in local development. Her Majesty's government will improve transport across the United Kingdom, delivering safer, cleaner services and enabling more innovations. Legislation will be introduced to modernise rail services and improve reliability for passengers. Her Majesty's ministers will bring forward an energy bill to deliver the transition to cheaper, cleaner and more secure energy. This will build on the success of the COP26 summit in Glasgow last year. Draft legislation to promote competition, strengthen consumer rights, and protect households and businesses will be published. Measures will also be published to create new competition rules for digital markets and the largest digital firms. Her Majesty's government will establish the UK Infrastructure Bank in legislation, with objectives to support economic growth and the delivery of net zero. Reforms to education will help every child fulfill their potential wherever they live, raising standards and improving the quality of schools and higher education. Her Majesty's ministers will publish draft legislation to reform the Mental Health Act. Her Majesty's government will continue to seize the opportunities of the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union to support economic growth. Regulations on businesses will be repealed and reformed. A bill will enable law inherited from the European Union to be more easily amended. Public sector procurement will be simplified to provide new opportunities for small businesses. New legislation will strengthen the United Kingdom's financial services industry, ensuring that it continues to act in the interest of all people and communities. The United Kingdom's data protection regime will be reformed. Her Majesty's government will continue to champion international trade, delivering jobs across the country and growing the economy. Legislation will be introduced to enable the implementation of the United Kingdom's first new free trade agreements since leaving the European Union. Her Majesty's ministers will encourage agricultural and scientific innovation at home. Legislation will unlock the potential of new technologies to promote sustainable and efficient farming and food production. Her Majesty's government will protect the integrity of the United Kingdom's borders and ensure the safety of its people. Her Majesty's ministers will take action to prevent dangerous and illegal channel crossings and tackle the criminal gangs who profit from facilitating them. Legislation will be introduced to ensure the police have the powers to make the streets safer. A bill will be brought forward to further strengthen powers to tackle illicit finance, reduce economic crime, and help businesses grow. Measures will be introduced to support the security services and help them protect the United Kingdom. Her Majesty's government will lead the way in championing security around the world. It will continue to invest in Her Majesty's gallant armed forces. Her Majesty's ministers will work closely with international partners to maintain a united NATO and address the most pressing global security challenges. The continued success and integrity of the whole of the United Kingdom is of paramount importance to Her Majesty's government, including the internal economic bonds between all of its parts. Her Majesty's government will prioritise support for the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and its institutions, including through legislation to address the legacy of the past. Her Majesty's government will ensure the Constitution is defended. Her Majesty's ministers will restore the balance of power between the legislature and the courts by introducing a Bill of Rights. Legislation will prevent public bodies engaging in boycotts that undermine community cohesion. Her Majesty's government will introduce legislation to improve the regulation of social housing, to strengthen the rights of tenants and ensure better quality, safer homes. Legislation will also be introduced to ban conversion therapy. Proposals will be published to establish an independent regulator of English football. In this year of the Platinum Jubilee, Her Majesty looks forward to the celebrations taking place across the United Kingdom and throughout the Commonwealth, and to the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham this summer. Members of the House of Commons, estimates for the public services will be laid before you. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, other measures will be laid before you. Her Majesty prays that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your councils.
The proceeding has ended.